This talk this evening, we're not going to do a Bible reading because I'm going to do an overview of what the week contains. Because this week we'll see the stresses and strains that Jesus and his disciples go through. And I want to say that Jesus and his disciples knew tremendous stress. They went through enormous roller coasters of highs and lows. And we can read about that in Mark chapter 14. But this week we will see when Jesus is in Simon's house that Mary comes in with this very expensive bottle of perfume and doesn't do what I think I might have done, just a few spoonfuls of it. But she takes the entire contents and she pours it over Jesus. When was the last time we broke open our lives in an act of extravagant love and worship? And even as she breaks that bottle open and the house is filled with the smell of that perfume and that love, Judas slips in to do what? He slips in to betray Jesus. And those events in the house are followed immediately by a special meal. And of course, Judas is there. He's there at the meal. And then there is that intimacy about this Last Supper. Because Mark tells us that it was a time of sweet fellowship with Jesus. And yet at this meal, Jesus introduces a very somber note into the whole affair, announcing that one of them is going to betray him. And they're saddened, they're disturbed by that. And each of them wonder, is Jesus somehow referring to them, him? And it's shortly after that that Peter makes that declaration of loyalty. And Peter means it, of course. Even if everybody else deserts you, I will hang on in there with you, Jesus. Peter means it, and Jesus knows that he means it as well, but he knows this. He knows that Peter won't live up to those aspirations. I think we can be hard on Peter, but let's remind ourselves that none of us live up to our aspirations. I'm tempted to be critical of Peter, and I have to remind myself that I don't live up to my aspirations either. There is none of us who are Christians that we aspire to be. I aspire to be a better Christian than I am, and I'm sure you feel that way as well. You know, even the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 7 discovered that as well. Romans 7 verse 18. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. He didn't even live up to his own aspirations of himself. We desire to be more faithful Christians. We desire to be better Christians than we actually are. And in verse 29, Peter declares, even if all fall away, I will not. And Jesus answers, I tell you the truth, tonight before the cock crows, twice you will disown me 3 times. Folks, we can fall so easily. Before the day passes, Jesus says, Peter, you're going to fall. You know, even if we are walking well with the Lord at this point in time, who knows what we are like, what sin we might fall into in a couple of hours' time. And within a short time of enjoying intimate fellowship with Jesus, saying that even if everyone else will fall away, Peter will stick with him. But within a few hours, Peter will deny him. And that old hymn is right. I need thee every hour, most gracious Lord. But before Peter's denial, Jesus goes through this agony of the soul in the Garden of Gethsemane when he prays, if this is your will, Father, spare me from it. And in the middle of this, he asks his disciples to keep watch with him while he goes off to pray. And they can't even do that. They can't even stay awake when Jesus is praying. And Peter, who's just declared that he will never disown Jesus, can't even keep his eyes open because he falls asleep. I think what disappointment on occasions I must be to Jesus. Because I can talk such a good life, but so often I fail him even in the little things. I cannot even be faithful in the little. And though Jesus told them to keep watch, it's Jesus himself who spots Judas and the temple guards arriving to arrest him. He can't even rely on these guys to watch his back. And it's all a bit undignified. When they arrest Jesus, one of the disciples will draw a sword, has a go at one of the arresting officers, cuts off his ear, and John, in his account, tells us who did it. The name of the person, Peter. So the night has suddenly turned very nasty, very physical, very violent. And right in the middle of it, and at the height of it, his followers run away and leave him on his own. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Because your experience is not unique. Why? The stress and the trials that most of us go through and will go through in this life, they are no exceptions. Jesus has experienced them. He knows what it is like to be loved by some people, hated by others. He knows both fellowship and loneliness. He knows what it is to have people promise to support you, then betray you, then deny you. He knows what it's like to be disappointed, to be deserted, to have lies told about you, to be humiliated. Jesus knows all about that. And Jesus was fully human. He knew the whole ocean of human emotions, and he observed them in his friends, and he knew that they would desert him and that they would deny him. And in some of the darkest hours, when he could do with their human support, they would fall asleep on him. And here's the amazing thing. He goes out and he dies for them anyway. Isn't that amazing? He dies for us anyway. Knowing what we're like, Jesus goes to the cross. Folks, it's an amazing love. And I want to tell you that Jesus was literally amazing. You know, this word amazed keeps cropping up throughout Mark's gospel. In Mark chapter 1 verse 27, it said the people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this, a new teaching and with authority?" Mark chapter 2 verse 12, he got up, took his mat in full view of them. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We've never seen anything like this." Mark 6 verse 51, then he climbed into the boat with them. The wind died down. They were completely amazed. And here we are again in Mark 15 verse 5. Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate this week was amazed. Jesus was literally amazing. You've seen how people were amazed by what Jesus said, Jesus did. And here's Pilate on this last week of Jesus' mission, amazed now by what Jesus doesn't do and doesn't say. Because clearly Pilate knows what's going on here. He doesn't look to Jesus and say, "Look at this dreadful thing that you've said and you've done. What have you to say for yourself?" Rather, he says to him in Mark chapter 15 verse 4, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of." Pilate knows the score. He knows these are wild accusations. There's no substance to them. Accusations are easily given, aren't they? Accusations mean nothing. Anybody can be accused of anything. And if we are guilty of all the things that people would accuse us of, we'd be in a bad way. And Pilate knows they are only accusations. In fact, in the previous chapter, Mark 14, we read this, "Then some stood and gave this false testimony against him," Jesus. Yet even then, their testimonies did not agree. They couldn't even get their act together sufficiently to lie consistently about him. And this case against Jesus is so shallowly presented, so obviously false, that Pilate can see through it anyway. And he's amazed at this man whom he knows is innocent, won't even defend himself. Pilate is amazed. He's never come across this before. And folks, isn't it true that we're so quick to jump to our own defense when we're accused? But Jesus doesn't do that. It is the Father's will that he will be taken by sinful people, be crucified for the sin of the world. The chief priests and the teachers of the law are not interested in the truth anyway, and the crowd aren't even interested in reason, never mind truth. They just want Jesus killed. They just want him out of their hair. And they've lied to get him to this point. And if Jesus wasn't prepared to die, he could have avoided it by countless other means. Why should he defend himself? But Pilate was amazed. The word amazed here used by Pilate actually means admiration. Pilate is not just amazed that Jesus does not defend himself, but he actually admires him. He sees in Jesus someone who is very different from the people who are accusing him, because Pilate knows the game. He understands what they're up to. Folks, you know, integrity is always admired. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't popular. You discover that maybe in school, in work, maybe even in home, doing the right thing isn't always popular. And sometimes doing the right thing causes a lot of hassle and a lot of work, and it creates problems for people, and they mutter about it. But secretly, no matter what they say, they note your integrity and they admire it. And let me encourage you, no matter what flack you take, be men and women of integrity. The rest can go their way, and they can lie, and they can cheat, and they can imagine themselves very clear in doing it. And Pilate compares the obvious, the diverse nature of Jesus' accusers with the clear integrity of Jesus himself, and he admires him. There's another reason why Pilate admires Jesus, and that is that he sees in Jesus those values, virtues, which he recognizes are absent in himself. In fact, what we have here is a very interesting meeting. Face to face is Jesus and Pilate. On one side, a man who knew no sin, and on the other, a man who is deeply flawed by sin and knows it. Pilate saw in Jesus something which he knew was missing in himself, and he was amazed. Jesus amazed people by what he said, by what he did. He amazed them by what he didn't say and what he didn't do. And I've been amazed by people like that too. Haven't you been amazed by the gracious responses by people in the things they say? Amazed by their prayers for those who are having a tough time? Amazed by their wise words? I'm amazed by some of the encounters I have with people, the things they say, the things they do, the things I see in them. And sometimes we're amazed by the things they don't say. Perhaps they had the opportunity to be critical of someone who was critical of them, and they didn't take it. And I'm amazed. I've been amazed where people could have claimed the credit for doing good, and they didn't do it. They let it go to someone else. Sometimes people amaze us by what they don't say and by what they don't do. And that's how Jesus amazed Pilate. Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament says this: there is a time to be silent and there is a time to speak. Jesus chose this was a time to be silent. And Mark tells us that it was the custom every year to have a prisoner released. And there was no shortage of prisoners this year because there had been an uprising and a number are awaiting execution. And Barabbas was one of them. And here again is two men, two choices. Life is about making choices. And here's the example of the two wrongs. The first choice was Pilate. He should have released Jesus and knew it. But his own omissions in the Gospels, he knew that Jesus was innocent. What do you do with an innocent person? You release them. And we know that Pilate didn't do that because the crowd wanted Jesus crucified. And as Mark puts it like this, wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them, and he had Jesus flogged and handed over to be crucified. The right decision for the crowd would have been to have Jesus, an innocent man, set free, but sin encouraged them to have a murderer set free and an innocent man condemned. And do you know something, folks? The crowd isn't always right, and Pilate followed the vote of the crowd. The right decisions for Pilate would have been to ignore the crowd. Jesus hadn't broken any law, but the pressure encouraged and forced Pilate down the road of a bad decision and to hand Jesus over to be flogged and crucified. Folks, any decision in my life that I take based on the Word of God, I am and I will be glad I made it. There may be difficulties at times. They may make you unpopular at times. And certainly there are times I wish I didn't have to make some of those decisions. But decisions I've had to make in life based on my sinful nature will always be the wrong ones. And I will always regret them later in making them. Sin always forces us down the road of bad decisions. And here in this chapter, both Pilate and the crowd make bad decisions based on their own sinful nature. But decisions made on the Word of God is perfect. This week we will see where those bad decisions that disciples will make, decisions a crowd will make, and Jesus indeed will suffer the consequences of their decision, and he will be put on that cross.